Hello, divine listeners, and welcome to episode 1 of the Harry Potter series. Thank you so much for coming back. If this is your first time listening, I would encourage you to check out the Balto series that I had just finished last week. That can be found in season 1 of this show. I'm going to mark Harry Potter as season 2. I think I'm just going to go ahead and do that for simplicity, just marking each new movie as a season, and then maybe when I come back to Harry Potter, it can be season 2, episode 8 for Chamber of Secrets, or episode 7, just so there's some organization to the podcast here. But I'm very excited to get started with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I did have 7 drafts written, but I think it's going to be 6 because, like I did with Balto, I'm going to end up actually combining 2 scenes for the first episode of the series, which I'm going to get into here. So essentially, the movie, I'm going to try to go in chronological order of the scenes in the movie, just for, continuity and clarity. But the scenes that I'm going to combine here are the endless letters that Harry Potter receives at the beginning, and then also when he gets his wand. So let's do a quick scene recap of the endless letters here. So we meet Harry in the cupboard under the stairs, and we know instantly that Harry is not treated well by his family. We see that he doesn't even have his own room. He's literally in a little storage closet, and his cousin, jumps on the stairs and dust falls on Harry, and then he slams the door shut when Harry tries to run out or walk out of his cupboard. And so we see that he's not treated well from the get-go. And he's told to go ahead and fetch the mail. And Harry sees a rather peculiar envelope that's addressed to him. And not only that, but it's his exact location within the house, which is the cupboard under the stairs. And so he's staring at that, kind of bewildered and not really sure what to make of it. But his obnoxious cousin steals it from him, and immediately Harry's uncle and aunt know. You can tell by the looks on their faces that this letter is dangerous, which is dangerous for the current dynamic that they've created around Harry of essentially abuse, control, and exploitation. And the sole meaning of the endless letters, we do know from the whole of the series that the Dursleys are well aware of Harry's potential, seeing as both of his parents were magical, and his Aunt Petunia was Harry's mother's sister. So she's very well aware of the magic in Harry's bloodline. And they strove to essentially turn his magical energy into a bleak and gray existence, and they managed to do this for the first 10 years of his life. They made sure that he was aware, you are less than your cousin, like Dudley is our prized, child, and you're essentially just a burden. And they kind of treat him in a Cinderella-ish way. And this letter is both a breaking of the spell for them, as well as an awakening for Harry. So something deeper is trying to reach him, to call him forward to his divine purpose. Something this important is not stopped at one attempt. And we also know that Dumbledore sends out quite a few of these letters, and he's also very aware when pieces are shifted. We see this happen in the Chamber of Secrets when he knows to send Harry's letter to the Burrow instead of to Privet Drive. We see this in Order of the Phoenix when he shows up at the hearing a few hours early, even though the minister changed the time to try to throw him off. So Dumbledore is very aware of all these little things going on here. And there's almost a hint of humor, I guess you could say a divine wink of sorts for Dumbledore in the manner in which these letters keep arriving, as if he's almost relishing in the futile attempts to keep someone's destiny at bay. He essentially just keeps upping the insanity of how these letters arrive. And depending on the movie that you watch, if you have the extended version, they show up in a carton of eggs, for example. And, they show up when Harry finally gets his hands on one through the fireplace, through the mailbox, like ridiculous numbers of these letters. So I think he's also kind of being playful with this. And it's interesting that the letters come flooding in also on a day that there isn't supposed to be post. As Vernon says that Sunday's his favorite day because there's no post on Sunday. And I really think that's a nice little touch because the message that Harry is supposed to get is so significant. And so it breaks traditional rules. It comes in ways that are not expected, which I think when things are that big, that tends to happen a lot. And I think that the soul meaning of these scenes with the letters towards the beginning can be interpreted as something that's meant for you will keep knocking, will keep coming, will keep giving you chances to realize the potential of its offering, even if there are forces of control and fear and denial trying to keep you from receiving it. But the letter is really only the beginning. The invitation arrives first, but then comes the question, once the door opens, how will your magic move through the world? And then that brings us to the scene with Harry, where he gets to pick out his wand in Diagon Alley. So for a scene recap there, Harry and Hagrid are making their way through Diagon Alley, and Harry has all of his supplies, except perhaps the most important, which is his wand. And Hagrid guides Harry to Olivander's, which is touted as the best shop for wand purchases. Harry walks in rather timidly, and he attempts to get the shopkeeper's attention as he takes in the endless display of wands before him. And Mr. Ollivander greets him pretty warmly, not really taking much care to hide how excited he is that the boy who lived has come to the age where he'll need a wand. Harry is then given several wands to choose from, however, none of them work quite right at first, and then the right wand finds him. The way the wand glows when Harry grabs hold of it reveals resonance and recognition. And we know from, in terms of this scene and the soul meaning of the wand, we know from the Harry Potter lore that the wand chooses the wizard. This is perhaps the crux of the soul meaning of this scene. Not the Horcrux, but the crux. And the wand does not create Harry's magic, but it reveals the form through which his magic can move. And I think that we see this in our own lives. Oftentimes, our talents often choose us. We may try our hand at sports, art, writing, acting, work, relationships, spiritual practices, really countless things. But meaning often arrives as a very distinct feeling, and it's very much a contrast when you might try to pick up a wand that breaks a pot, like Harry's does when he first tries it, or makes other wands fly off the shelf. It's chaos, it doesn't resonate, it doesn't fit, and you know it. There's resonance, there's recognition, and we have this moment where we realize, yes, this is it. It's like a clear bell on a quiet day. But this scene in the series is perhaps one of the most fascinating. So, as we know, Harry's wand contains the only other feather that this particular phoenix gave. The first feather resides in Voldemort's wand, and some theorize this is because Harry has a Horcrux inside of him, which is a perfectly plausible theory. I have another one, or at least one that works in combination. I believe it's much more loving than this, because the wand's core contains a feather from the same phoenix. Harry and Voldemort can wound but not fatally harm one another. This is something that Voldemort states later in the series when he's asking to use someone else's wand. And I believe this was another layer of divine protection, much like his mother's love is later in this movie, and then throughout the series we see his mother's love assist him in times of danger. And I asked myself, did Dumbledore influence this? And all I can say is I had that I wonder, as Olivander says, which is something to think about. Because I feel like Dumbledore, and a lot of people might disagree, but me watching at least the series, the movies, I'm not talking about the books, because the books I'm not as familiar with, but in terms of the movies, Sorcerer's Stone through Deathly Hallows, I see Dumbledore always as trying to protect Harry as much as possible. I know some people would say, oh, he used him. Snape even says it in Deathly Hallows. You're essentially raising him as a pig for slaughter, and he was moving him around the chessboard to try to, end Voldemort. But I really think that Dumbledore knew that Harry's path would be so difficult, and he attempted to put as many layers of protection in Harry's path as he could. And I do wonder if the wand, if he had any kind of influence in that, because I kind of look at Dumbledore as a divine feminine figure in this series. He is very loving, very compassionate, very guiding, and just always looking out for Harry. So I wonder if he did something to influence that wand selection. But either way, the symbolism remains powerful. Harry's wand carries both connection and protection. And it's important to note that the wand is not the source of magic itself. It is the vessel that allows the magic to move. And between these two scenes, I would kind of close with the soul meaning to say the letters tell Harry, you are more than this cupboard. And the wand tells Harry, your magic has a way through. And for a personal mirror here, once again, as I said on the last series, this podcast would be one of those letters for me. We've all had an inner Dursley voice saying, don't look at that, don't open that, don't take that path, which is the voice of essentially fear and restriction. And then there's another voice of curiosity and openness that tends to rise up to challenge it. And I think sometimes in the smallest ways, like taking a different direction to work, where you may meet someone new, or in my case, starting this podcast where I delve into the divine dialogue within meaningful stories, I think that we're often given chances to, choose to open the letter and to go with the next steps. And maybe some of us never even open the letter, or maybe we do what Vernon does and we toss it into the flames because we don't want to take the chance of opening it. And for me, this podcast has been in the works for quite a while because I've always loved stories. There's scenes that are permanent, fixations in my mind that I think about all the time. And I just had this desire to, write drafts on them and speak meaning in a deeper way. And I also do believe that this podcast is one of my wands too. Because how many times have we picked up wands that refuse to cast the spells that we wanted them to? And I can say for me, I found myself in many situations that just simply didn't fit. It was like forcing a square peg into a round hole, and it just creates havoc. But I think it's really important to remember that this doesn't mean we give up on casting spells or that we hide our magic. It just means we need the right vehicle to cast through. So sometimes the wrong wand can make us believe something is wrong with us. We may think we are not talented, not creative, not capable, not spiritual, or not meant for more. But I would leave this as a challenging thought to those rather disheartening suggestions. Maybe the problem was never our magic. Maybe it was the vessel itself. Maybe we were trying to use something that was never meant to respond to us. And then one day, something glows in our hand. For me, divine dialogue feels like both things. It feels like the letter that kept arriving, and it feels like the wand that finally glowed in my hand. And now me speaking about these things, you could interpret as the magic that comes out of the wand, which I hope it turns into a rather deep spell, not in the sense of trying to put a spell on you listeners, but in terms of it being magical. I do hope that that happens. And that leads us into the divine dialogue question. I invite you to reflect on what letters have been trying to reach your doorstep that have been thrown into the fire, ripped up, or ignored. What nudges have kept nagging at you? What has your soul been leaning towards? And once you receive the letter, what wand feels right for spellcasting in your own life? What vehicle does your magic want to move through now? And I think it's really important I'm going to focus on the wand scene more than the letters scene to answer this, because I think it's really crucial that when we go and try out different wands or different things that we think magic can come through in our life, I think it's really important to give yourself a lot of grace in trying different things and just listening to if doing things fulfills you or if you feel more depleted after trying them. And I think it's very important also, which can be very hard, to very carefully limit the amount of external influence that that tries to reach you when you're trying different things. Because we all know how that can be. Like, the culture can tell you, well, you shouldn't pursue that because it's not going to make enough money. This isn't productive enough. This avenue of exploration is not responsible. There's all sorts of different levers of shame and discouragement and rejection that can be built into wands that you want to try before you even pick them up. So I think it's very important to really become still, sink back into yourself, into your soul, and really feel what moves you, what resonates, what makes you feel depleted, what makes you feel uplifted, and the types of things that tend to drain you more than uplift you. I think it's very crucial to pay attention to those feelings, because if you tend to go with whatever the external culture might say, then you can find yourself definitely stuck in things that give you zero passion or fulfillment. And then it can feel like as you get older, maybe the number of wands on the shelf available for you to pick up go down. And I do think that there's some truth in that. The younger we are, maybe the more potential we have, the more time we have, the less programming has been able to take over our mind and influence us to go a certain direction. So I would just say, when you go to pick out the wands you want to try, just make sure it's you making the decision and not a program, not pressure, not the need for external acceptance or validation. Just make sure it's you going in there to find, where the magic wants to move through you. Make sure it's coming only from you. And I guess what I can take also from the lesson of the endless letters is that sometimes the sacred, the soulful, and the divine do not always arrive with grace or politeness. Sometimes the interruption to our lives is an old truth that refuses to stop knocking, but the message will keep trying to reach you. The stamina of the soul doesn't give up after a few tries. And when you finally receive the message, the next part of the journey is allowing your magic to find the right form. And that's essentially what I would take from those first two scenes of the Harry Potter series. I originally did have them separated, but like I said, I wanted to go ahead and combine them because I just felt like they kind of went together, and I feel like they probably would have been a little bit too short on their own. I'm not like trying to go for a specific time every podcast, but so far I've noticed that around 20 minutes seems to be a really nice rhythm and flow. I don't feel like anything is forced in there. I don't feel like I'm kind of putting filler in. It feels like I'm kind of hitting every place that I want to talk about. So I think that that's kind of a good general time you can expect for a typical episode. So far, that seems to be the case. But for next week's episode, we're going to go into essentially when Harry becomes the seeker on the team and what I think that signifies and what I think the symbolism of the seeker is. We're going to talk about why I think the name of the seeker is such a brilliant name to the position on the Quidditch team. I think it's a great label to give that positional player on the field for multiple reasons, and kind of going into the golden snitch and like how I think that also applies to real life. So we're going to go into the symbolism essentially of Quidditch and Harry getting a spot on the team. But thank you very much for joining me in this first episode of the Harry Potter series. I will be back next week with that Seeker episode. And in the meantime, divine listeners, please, if you do have any suggestions for movies or shows, games, anything that you'd like me to delve into, pick out a scene for me. That would probably be the best way, if you could send me a scene. And I'd be happy to go ahead and take a look at it and break it down and try to find the divine dialogue, the soul meaning of the scene, and how I think it can help us in our lives. My business email is in the show notes of this episode, just like in any other episode. And thank you for joining me, and I hope you're having a great day. And until next time, I will catch you on the next one.